Deb Hoover. I'm the head of HR and Administrative Services at the Urban Institute, but probably more importantly, I get the honor of being the chair of the Think Tank Diversity Consortium, who's the sponsor of this event this morning. The Think Tank Diversity Consortium, for those that you don't know, is a group of member think tanks around Washington primarily. These are firms that do policy research across many different fields, but we come together as organizations for a specific purpose, which is encouraging and fostering diversity and inclusion practices in our sector. So we're extremely happy to have you here today. I say wow because I have teenage boys and I would have had to have had dynamite to get them out of bed this morning to get here for this. So I'm incredibly impressed. I can't say much without saying thank you to our host, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and specifically Lynn Sport. Her and her team, I know, put a lot of work into this, and she had colleagues at Brookings, Jackie Basile, Zarina Durrani, and some others who worked to make this happen. Let me say a little bit about what we do. I'm from Ohio. I grew up in a very lower middle class, poor town where think tank, there was absolutely no idea what a think tank was. How did I get here? I'm honestly not quite sure at times. If you're interested in things like encouraging peace around the world, reducing poverty, getting greater access to health care for low-income working families or others that are disadvantaged and need help, if you're interested in making sure education is accessible and affordable for all so that students can have careers in fields they're interested in and they can actually make decent money doing it, if you're interested in how we pay for these things, think tanks or policy research firms are the places to be. Whether you're doing research or doing policy work or doing communications or any of these things, or even HR like me, these are places where you can make a difference. So today, I challenge you to use this opportunity to ask the questions you need. So many times I meet with young applicants who aren't quite sure what we do, don't know how to navigate a career in a field like this. They think it sounds like something interesting, but they've never had the chance to ask a lot of questions and get answers they need to make decisions. So use today to your advantage. It's a great opportunity. Everybody that's here representing these organizations is here to do that, to answer questions and to help you along the way. I don't want to take up all of your time. There's some great people here to talk with you about careers and the questions you may have. I just want to say one last thing is that I'm a little older than you are. I didn't start out looking for this. If I had known, I sure would have navigated differently. It took me a long time to find my way to where I am. Along the way, I also didn't think about what was going to make me happy longer in my career. I hope you get a chance to explore that, think seriously about it, because these are places where you could go home at the end of the day and feel incredibly proud of the work you and your organization has done. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to one of my colleagues, Sandra Barrett from Peterson Institute for International Economics.
Thank you, Debbie. And good morning to everyone. How are you this morning? Everybody's good? My name is Sandra Barrett. I am the Director of Human Resources at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. The Peterson Institute, as Deb mentioned, is one of several member organizations that are a part of the Think Tank Diversity Consortium. And just to echo Debbie's comments, we're really excited about today and really impressed that all of you have showed up here. You certainly have could have done other things with your time this morning, but I can certainly guarantee you that over the next few hours, you will consider this time an investment in your career development future. So thank you for taking this step for being here today. I am pleased to have the opportunity to introduce my colleague, who is our guest speaker, Justin Woofers. Justin is the gentleman sitting here in the front with the really great hair, right here. Justin is a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. He's been with the Institute since September 2014. He's currently on leave from the University of Michigan, where he serves as a professor of economics and public policy. Justin also was a recent visiting fellow at Brookings Institute, which is also a member organization of the Think Tank Diversity Consortium. And he also was a visiting professor at the University of Sydney in his native Australia. Justin is a true standout in his field. He's a very popular teacher, a popular blogger. He's a blogger on Freakonomics, and he has a large presence in the Twitter environment. Justin has received many awards and recognitions for his outstanding work in public policy and economics. One in particular is being named one of the top 25 economists under the age of 45 by the IMS organization. Justin is a great scholar who plays a big part in creating what people understand and learn about our global economy. So you're probably thinking to yourself, how does one reach the heights of becoming a scholar? Well, just to give you a little bit of background in terms of his success from an academic standpoint, Justin is an undergraduate from the University of Sydney. He received his master's from Harvard and his PhD from Harvard in 2001. Justin discovered early on in high school that he had a liking for economics and agriculture. So on the flip side of being a scholar, there are things that one would consider in their personal lives that I was interested to learn about Justin. So I asked him a few questions, and I want to share with you because there's more to life, of course, than besides what we do in our careers. So Justin's favorite team is Michigan. He coaches his daughter's soccer team. His favorite television show is House of Cards, and his favorite clothing designer is Benetton. I also asked Justin to just tell me a little bit about his hobbies. Certainly there has to be something outside of economics, mathematics, and statistics that he's interested in. Justin shared with me that he enjoys running, he enjoys playing with his kids, and last but not least, in his spare time, he likes to think about economics. So without further ado, if you could join me in welcoming a gentleman and a scholar, a man who has done great in his field of public policy, research, and economics. He's done a great job in his current career, and he's a bright, shining star for the future. Please join me in welcoming Justin Woofers.
So good morning. It is kind of early, huh? So I thought this would be more fun if we did this sort of as more of as a conversation than a lecture. So, you know, as I say things that strike you as odd, unusual, if I speak in a funny accent, let me know, and we'll dig down a little deeper into whatever it is you guys want to talk about. My role here is to answer three questions, I think. One, what is public policy? The fact that you're here this morning probably gives me some sense you already know. Two, why does it matter? And three, what does life look like at a think tank? So, you know, what is public policy? You know, we could look for formal definitions, but more or less, you know, anything that sort of shapes the broader world that we live in. It's not really how I came to it, and I think it's probably not how you came to it either. My personal story for how I came to being interested in public policy, I was finishing high school in my native country, Australia. It was Australia at that time. For my economics class, you had to remember the latest economic statistics. I don't know why the teachers thought that was useful, but they did. And so I had to remember the latest unemployment rate. And the latest unemployment rate was sort of, 7%. And then the next month it was 7.5%. And the next month it was 8%, and then 9%, and 10%. And Australia went, as I was finishing high school, went through one of those wrenching recessions that the United States just went through. And I was, apart from the fact that it was a hassle, I had to keep remembering a new number every month. I then spent a little bit of time thinking about what that number meant. And of course, 10% unemployment is not just a number. It's families whose lives are in many cases being destroyed. It's mums and dads who want to go to work, can't find it, and whose self-esteem is being undermined. It's kids who don't have the money to keep up with the other kids in their class. It's higher crime rates, it's higher divorce, it's greater health risks, it's higher suicide risks. It's a wrenching experience. And when you start to think about that and you realize that it's not inevitable, you realize there's a really important role for public policy. And so that was my personal thing. And so, there's a part of us, and I'm sure you're each coming out of the end of this now, you finish high school, start college, all of that's fun, but you're thinking, what's the next step? And, the next step could be a satisfying career for me. I could go off and become a hedge fund manager, be very successful at it, own a helicopter, fly directly to the Hamptons, and then Monday morning fly back to work. And at the end of the day, I might have a 53-room beach house, but I'm not sure I have anything to show for it, which is, I think the business we're fundamentally involved in is trying to make the world a better place. And I say that completely unself-consciously. And I think, one of the terrible things about being in your 40s is you start to lose a little bit of that. But one of the wonderful things I remember about being in my late teens and early 20s is my social conscience really started to clobber me over the head and say, hey, I'm here, we should be working for something a little bit more important. And I hope that each of you find yourself somewhat driven by that. And if you do, then I think that's what public policy is. It's trying to find some broader sense of service. Now, there are lots of ways we can do our sense of service, right? It could be at the narrow micro level. It could be perhaps you mentor kids at the local high school. It could be you're involved with a church youth group. It could be as simple as being good to your family. But if you want to have a more enduring impact, then you can look at a more macro level. And it's when we look at that more macro level beyond just the friends and family who are around us that I think we're thinking about public policy. So the great thing about it is once you decide that what you want to do is be committed to some greater good, there are in fact lots of greater goods out there and lots of just incredibly amazing issues to get involved with. And in some sense, what I hope you're struggling with is not the question of should I get involved, but where should I get involved? Because take the question of international development, tremendously important issue. We in the United States, we call people poor when their annual incomes are sort of, $10, $11, $12,000. For billions, for a majority of the world's population, that would be called rich. And there are countries where the average income per capita, many countries where the average income per capita is less than $1 or $2 a day. And so the degree of human suffering that one sees there is just extraordinary. And the great thing about finding a place with an enormous amount of human suffering is there's a lot we can do. And development is one case. International relations, this is not my field at all, but you see countries go to war and literally millions die in genocides. The likes of which none of us have had to live through, or particularly those who are native to the United States have had to live through, but the effects of which must be absolutely devastating. You don't have to walk too far from this institution to find neighborhoods in the United States with real poverty problems and families struggling to make ends meet. So there's issues around the minimum wage, there's issues around unemployment insurance. Each of us comes from families and how families balance their lives with their work, with their careers. So work-life balance is an issue one hears a lot about these days. There is economic policy. I began by saying the thing that drew me to public policy was an enormous recession that Australia didn't have to have. The United States just went through one and we're not yet fully recovered from one fully 8 years later. So as striking as it is for me to think about it, a third of your life so far has been in an economy that's been dramatically underperforming as a result of an enormous economic policy mistake. And it's likely the case that the impacts of that are going to continue to be felt in the economy for another decade at least, and for many families forever. There's questions around social policy, of course. You might be particularly interested in reproductive rights, for instance. What are the rights of the unborn children? Or alternatively, what are the rights of a woman to her body and to control her own fertility? There are questions around the disabled. How is it that we can work to integrate them better into our community? There are criminal justice questions. We're in a country which has just undergone an enormous incarceration boom. So large now that among prime age African American men, something like a quarter of them who are looking for work have a felony conviction, and as a result, they never actually get past the first interview with an employer. There's the shape of our cities and urban planning, and you don't have to look far these days to think about Ferguson and Baltimore to realise that these are tremendously important issues. And so, you know, the scope here is incredibly wide, and I should also say the sets of intellectual lenses through which you can look at this is also incredibly wide. So I come at all of this as an economist, which isn't as boring as it sounds. I do think about the whole world in terms of supply and demand, and sometimes that's useful. But, you know, you could be an economist. Of course, we economists would be nowhere if we didn't have some insight into political science as well and how the policy process works, what the pressure points are, when are the times when you can actually have an effect, how is it you would actually go about organising so that you would have an effect. Sociology brings a lot to the table as well, and maybe some of you are studying sociology where you're dealing with things like criminal justice, you're dealing with issues like the family, with labour markets and unions and how institutions form and shape the society we live in. One of the fields that I think is increasingly important, and the public policy world is only starting to understand how important it is psychology. There are many aspects of psychology. So, for instance, a lot of the social ills we see are literally the result of people making mistakes. To take a trivial example, my in-laws never got around to saving for retirement, which, you know, meant that life was pretty good in their 40s and 50s, but now retirement's getting a little closer. They're a little worried looking forward at that. And that's a cognitive mistake that people made. Think about developmental psychology and what are the best ways to raise children, happy, functional children who go on to become functional members of society. So I think, you know, the advice that I would give if you're interested in a career in public policy is to know something, like really know something. If you want to enter the debate, the public debate is not debate club. It's not about being the most eloquent, and it's not about having the smallest, what are those cards called? Index cards, so no one can see that you're reading off your index card. It's not about having the funniest story. It's actually about knowing something. And it's about being one of the most expert people in the world on the thing that you're trying to communicate on. And so as you're thinking about your careers, what I would encourage you to do is start at the end, think about what is it I care about, what are the issues, and then think back, what's the expertise I would have to be the person that the president would want to call if he wants to know about that. And I could even say he or she, because it may be a female president. And that's where I'd wind back. And so that's where I think knowing something is important. And that's why I'd say I would strongly encourage you to think about fields like economics, political science, sociology, or psychology. Now, then there's all these other fields that I know people in Washington studied, and I'm going to give you my personal bias about them. I call them the parenthesis fields. You're in college and you feel like you should study the liberal arts. And when someone like Sandra interviews you for a job, they're sort of like, I say, you know, how well qualified is this student? And she says, oh, they're really, really smart. And then she says in parentheses, but they only studied history. Now, history is really fascinating, but it's not the thing you're trying to shape because it already happened. So I think of history as being less substantively rooted in the debate. I'd say the same about fields like women's studies, ethnic studies, things like that. The other big parenthesis field, but it's an unusual one, is law. So there are two ways I think about law. Lots of people go on and study the law, and actually Washington and other centres of public policy have a tremendous demand for lawyers. White House Counsel is one of the most active groups inside the White House, for instance. So there are a lot of very important jobs involving the law. The Southern Poverty Law Centre is another you may have heard of. Legal aid is obviously incredibly important. There's a bunch of groups where you grow up and you become a lawyer and you work in the law. And I think that's a great idea. There's a lot of people who finish undergraduate and they're like, oh, well, I finished my liberal arts degree and the job market sucks. so I'm just going to keep studying, I'll go get a law degree. And I think it sort of works in one dimension, which is they come out at the end of school totally with this wonderful set of credentials, and it's a set of credentials that'll open a lot of doors, and Sandra will actually go ahead and interview you. The problem is you're not actually the world's expert in anything. And so I think law school is great if you want to work in the law, but if what you want is an impressive credential, get an impressive credential where you learn something that's related to the thing you want to do. And that's why I'd come back to working inside the disciplines. Now, within public policy, there's like 1 million places to get involved. Okay? So just think about the sectors. So, today I'm officially meant to talk to you about think tanks. And think tanks are great. I love think tanks. I've spent some of my career inside them. But they're not the only choice. So, beyond think tanks, there's getting involved directly in the government, right? So you could be involved directly in the political side. You may run for office one day, or you may work inside someone's staff. You may be a congressional staffer or work for someone in your local state and local government. You may be a political appointee down at the White House, things like that. So there's the federal government, and you can think about the political career path. And within the political career path, there's 2 separate career paths. There's actually being a politician, so make sure you have perfectly straight teeth, things like that. But there's also being the politician's staff. And the thing that's most amazing, and I've found most stunning since I moved to Washington, is watching how unbelievably influential political staffs can be. So you can walk in, you want to get a meeting with Senator such and such, Senator Old Man, and you might think you want to talk to the senator, and you'll usually be sent aside to sit in an office with a 24-year-old instead. You'll be like, I'm important. What am I doing talking to a 24-year-old? And maybe even the senator's in the room making sure to shake your hand, and they all have very impressive handshakes, and sort of pretend they're listening. But the truth is often the senator has other things on their mind. Their schedule is blocked out 15 minutes by 15 minutes, and it involves shaking a lot of hands and making sure people feel that they were touched, but not necessarily thinking or policy development. So it turns out when you're in that room with the senator and the 24-year-old, or sometimes only with a 24-year-old, it's the 24-year-old who's going to get things done. They're the ones taking notes, and at the end of the meeting, we'll actually figure out what the action plan is. And the action plan, maybe they call the 24-year-old from 10 other senators' offices, and between them they then call a 26-year-old who actually went and got a law degree, who's then going to draft the legislation. And at some point they'll say to the senator, remember that meeting we had? We have a bill now, it's got your name on it. So I think there's a really important role that you can play as the expert inside a political office rather than being the politician. And I'm not saying if you are going to run for president, you shouldn't do it. I'm just suggesting that the range of things that one can do are enormously broader. That's one side of working in public policy directly, and another is actually working inside the bureaucracy, which is to be an advisor, is actually to be the folks who are at the Department of Energy making energy policy, or the folks at the Department of Treasury making economic policy. And these are institutions, these are huge institutions because the US is a huge country and needs a huge amount of expertise with very well-developed career paths. And I think if you come back to it, what you're trying to do in those institutions is exactly trying to make the world a better place. So, one, there's the government. Second, there's things like, there's international institutions. So there's the International Monetary Fund, terrific place if you want to travel the world. The World Bank, terrific place if you want to travel the world and get outside of 5-star hotels. There's a slew of these other international institutions. You'll see them all up and down as you walk around DC. There is, as we're officially here to talk about think tanks, the think tank sector is rich and vibrant and gives you a lot of scope to pursue your careers. And I'll say a little more about that in due course. You could maybe, what you want to do is actually be an activist. Actually sort of be at the front lines of trying to create change or trying to create the broader push for change, trying to bring the public along so the public then push the politicians, so the politicians tell their 24-year-olds to write some legislation. And so there are a huge number of very, very interesting activist organizations, and on just about any issue you can think about, I bet you'll find there are not only enormously important national activist organizations, but also important local ones in your local communities as well. In public policy, here's one you probably haven't thought about. Corporations have an important role in public policy. So many corporations, one of the most important things they do is actually interact with government. Think about a company like Microsoft. You might think that Microsoft is all engineers and computer scientists and nerds just typing in front of their computers all day. But Microsoft's only asset is actually a promise from the government that no one else is allowed to sell copies of Word and Excel and Windows. Microsoft basically owns nothing. All it owns is a bunch of bits and bytes. And those bits and bytes are easy to copy. And the only reason you can't copy it is because the government has copyright rules preventing it. So all of Microsoft's value is actually based on a promise from the government, which then means that Microsoft is itself engaged deeply in interactions with the government. And so they will, of course, always be very involved in questions around not just cybersecurity and things like that, but intellectual property and the protections of their patents and the like. The other domain there are two other domains where I think people are often active in public policy, and I work in both of them. One is academia, so going on to become a professor. There's some great things about that, and there's some less great things. The great things are we have brilliant students, and our job is just to teach, and then our other job is to just go into our offices and think, and that's kind of awesome. The downside is it's there's no downsides. Who am I kidding? I get paid and I don't have to work very hard. The downside is you're less directly engaged in public policy. It's very easy for academics to get engaged in arcane debates about minutiae and trivia rather than thinking about what is it. I'm an economics professor. Should I be thinking about what are the fundamental economic problems that are facing America today, or what are the details of an arcane mathematical proof that will help get me published in an arcane journal that will help get me a promotion? And that's a very difficult tension that academics face. And then another set of important public policy actors is, of course, the media. And I think much more than any other institution, you have a tremendous ability to shape the debate if you're actually the ones informing the public about it. So one of my other roles I play is I write for the New York Times. And I find that tremendously rewarding because I can think of an issue of the day, I can write 800 words about it, and I can know the next morning it'll be in front of 1 million people. And one of the things you'll see throughout many public policy institutions, my first ever job was at the Reserve Bank of Australia, so I used to work in a government institution. And I had things I was meant to do. I was meant to monitor the labour market and inform my boss's boss's boss about what was happening in the Australian labour market. But almost every day what would happen is I'd go into work and my boss's boss's boss had read the newspaper and had read about something that was going on with some new wage campaign or something that was going on with the unemployment rate. And my job that day would basically be to figure out what the heck this newspaper article was about and inform my boss about what was happening. And so my agenda was actually being very much shaped by, determined by the press. That's not unique to my first job. In fact, if any of you have ever taken a first political job, often if you're the 18-year-old working up on the Hill, your job will be to figure out what the press clippings are, figure out a way of interpreting them and communicating them to the policymakers who are around you. And even the very busy 24-year-olds I was describing before, their workday still is absolutely dominated by responding to the issue of the day as it happens to be seen in the press. And so there's a lot of people who will tell you that journalism is a dead, lost, or dying art. Because the world is changing, right? There was a day back in the old days, all newspapers were in print and journalists all worked for every major city had 2 major newspapers, and so they all knew their job, which was to come in, write 3 stories a week, and it would be printed in one of the 2 newspapers in your city, and it was a cozy duopoly where everyone made profits and no one had to work too hard. The world's changing, of course. We all consume our news electronically now. And the economics of the media have changed enormously. The other thing that's changed, though, is the opportunity. It used to be the only way that you could possibly ever write and be read was to have a job at one of these major newspapers. Today, if you write something smart for your even school newspaper, you will actually get, I'll find it, I'll tweet about it, it'll then get picked up on national media, and before you know it, you can start a major national story. You actually see this happening all the time. So For people who are smart and who know things, I think there's actually never been a better time to be writing for a popular audience. In terms of, what is it about, I'm going to give you guys a warning, which is in 3 minutes I'm going to take another sip of my water and just stop, having answered one of my 3 questions, what is public policy? But I'll stop and see if you've got any questions, comments, or thoughts. There are different types of careers in public policy, and they come with different demands in terms of qualifications. So roughly speaking, you can think about what are the careers you can get with an undergraduate degree, with a master's degree, and a PhD. So with an undergraduate degree, a really good undergraduate degree that shows that you're smart and sharp, there are lots and lots of policy roles that you can play. We talked already about the very smart and very important 24-year-olds up on the Hill, the young journalists who are writing. The organizations at the Peterson Institute, we employ research analysts. Their job is to work with the senior fellows, so folks like me, and support our research. And I think that's kind of interesting and fun, and it's a great way of spending your early 20s, and that's exactly what I did. I finished my undergraduate degree and became a research assistant at the Reserve Bank of Australia. But it's limited. By your late 20s, it's really interesting for the first 2 or 3 years, and then you can grow through your career for another few years. But then there's some point where one of the great things about the American public policy debate is it really demands expertise. But that also means that at some point your career tops out if you only ever go as far as an undergraduate degree. So then you could think, well, what's next? You could go to law school because that's what everyone does. Or I teach at a public policy school, the Ford School for Public Policy at the University of Michigan. And there are many good public policy schools in the US. The Kennedy School at Harvard, the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton, the Harris School at Chicago. So you go and get a 2-year master's degree. Some people go to business school instead, get a 2-year MBA. And there the career path opens up again, and I think there's a lot more that you can do with those degrees. There are, and so you can basically do anything once you have a master's degree. And I'm going to say anything, and I'm going to put in a big asterisk, and I'm going to come back to that asterisk in a moment, because what I just said is not true. But you can have a range of very, very interesting public policy careers once you've gotten a reasonably good master's degree. And enough that, you could be chief of staff at, the National Economic Council. You could be a chief of staff for any number of people around this place. So then I went the next step, and I went and got a doctoral degree, a PhD. It's not for everybody. And so this is, if what you want to do is be the nerd who knows the most, that's the path forward, okay? And there are a bunch of things where there are huge returns to knowing more about something than anyone in the world. And that's what getting a PhD is all about. Now, that only makes sense if you think that you could spend the rest of your life digging down so deep on this one issue that I'm going to be the world's expert, say, on the minimum wage, okay? And that means you've got to forget about a whole bunch of the other things you care about. And all you got to do is think about labour markets and minimum wages, labour markets and minimum wages. But the returns are that, at institutions like the Federal Reserve Board, which I think is an important public policy institution, basically anyone, the price of admission to a serious meeting is a PhD. There's no way you can be hired and do a long-term career at the Fed without a PhD. That's not true everywhere. So the White House, for instance, hires a ton of people who are more or less master's degrees and law degrees. So it depends on, you want to understand the field that you want to be a part of, and it varies quite a lot across fields. But, people will always tell you that going on to further study is a lot of work and a lot of money. Let me say 2 things about that. So I'm going to assume for now you're already all committed to outstanding undergraduate degrees. And so I'm talking about a conversation you're going to have with yourselves in a few years' time. One thing people worry about is it's a lot of work. That's crazy. So a master's degree, you get to take 2 years out of the workforce, go off to a place with a whole bunch of really smart people who are your age and who have the same interests and passions that you do, work really hard with them, and party really hard with them. And at the end of it, you took 2 years off, and instead of your career going south because you took 2 years off, your career goes north because you took 2 years off and they give you extra letters after your name as a result, right? Like, there is no one in the world who doesn't want to take 2 years off to have that much fun? And unfortunately, the US labor market is not well structured to give us that opportunity to go and have fun like that. And so this is the one opportunity that you get, and it's several years down the path for you guys, but it's so much fun. Of course, you've got to do the homework and all the rest of that stuff, but you choose the thing you're interested in, and you get to work on the thing that you're passionate about with like really amazing people. And they will be friends of yours for the rest of your life. Now, you know, as I said, I went that, so that's the easy advertisement for a master's degree. 1 or 2 years out of the workforce, having fun, none of the usual pressures, blah, blah, blah. And then you're going to say, but Justin, you know, student debt, harumph. When I was 20, I worried a lot about the debt that I was getting into. I'm now 40, I earn so much money I can't even tell when I'm paying off my student debt. Now, that's not a statement about how much I'm earning. That's simply a statement. What you need to do is think about what people in your field earn when they're in their 30s and their 40s. Don't think about your current income, think about your future income. And actually, public policy, you know, a life in public policy is not ever going to be as remunerative as becoming a hedge fund manager, but you can certainly live a very comfortable life and raise your family in a way in which you don't feel substantial financial compromises. And so when you think about this, the thing to realize, you take $100,000 student debt, it's not that you've got to pay it off in a single year. You know, it's a few $1,000s every year. And a few $1,000s, if you're earning $80,000, just isn't that much money. And so I think that, you know, the long-term investment here is in a career which you love versus a career in which you've topped out at age 28 and things are just going to be, you know, somewhat more drab. So I think the investment here is kind of obvious. And the other thing I would say is you look at the salaries of people before their masters and after their masters. And the truth is the payoff is enormous. That the numbers on this are astounding, but as a flat-out financial investment, if you could choose whether to put money in the stock market or in your own education, the rate of return is higher from your own education than in the stock market. It's one of the best savings vehicles that exist. You know, as I said, the other possibility is you go on to think about a doctoral degree. And there, the good news is you rarely have to go into student debt because, believe it or not, the universities pay you to do this. I was stunned when I heard this. I was like, because everyone always talks about how expensive college is. And then like I was like, God, how am I ever going to afford, you know, $30,000 a year of fees? Until I realized actually the $30,000 goes the other way. And they were paying me to do it. So, you know, there's no short-term hit. It's not quite the 2-year party of a master's degree. It takes a special kind of nerd to want to spend 4 to 6 years of their life on one topic. And we're not all the most socially engaged people. I love my classmates, and it was one of the most transformative experiences of my life, and I'd recommend it to anybody, but it was difficult. But that's the other pathway forward. So, you know, that was the first thing I was going to talk about. What is public policy? I just tried to give you something of an answer to that. I'm going to go on to a few other things first, but I want to stop for questions, comments, or thoughts before I go on. Stella.
So you've been suggesting to go into master's degrees. Would you recommend to a general student to take a break before you start your master's degree and do field work like you did, or do you think there's an advantage to going straight into your master's?
It's a good question.
Obviously, it depends on the individual.
Yeah. So it depends on the individual. Let me answer the question you didn't ask and then try and come back to your question. So if what you're thinking about was doctoral work, I think going undergraduate straight to a doctoral dissertation is insane. You've done 4 hard years. You kind of don't think more school is any more fun by the end of your senior year. And also you want your dissertation work to be informed by some understanding of the actual real world out there. So I think doing 2 years at something. And actually, I think think tanks are a great spot to do those 2 years. So when I do doctoral admissions at Michigan, one of the things I like to look for is, you know, if you've spent 2 years at the Brookings Institution or at the Peterson Institute or at this shop or something else, I think that shows a seriousness of purpose. For a master's degree, you know, I think you want to get your career started first. And you want to figure out, you know, careers are like clothes. You've got to try them on and see if they fit. And so straight out of school, I'd try a few things on. And then you'll sort of get a sense of what works for you. And then I think that gives you a strong sense of whether you should be going to an MBA, Masters in Public Policy, something else. So you would have to be deeply certain of where you're going before I'd recommend going directly. Others? Yeah.
So when you do your work, like when you like do your research or your writing, I think you talk a little bit about this, but could you talk a little bit more about the impact that you see of that? Because the part that I'm concerned with, and I'm sure other people around this room are also concerned with, is that the service part, a lot of it from a human perspective involves seeing the impact of the work that you do. So what impact do you see on a day-to-day basis?
It's a great question. It's also a perfect segue to where I was going to go anyway. So I want to make sure before I answer it, if there are other questions or comments before we go to what was question 2, which is why does it matter? Yeah.
I know this is for the younger people in the room, but I think something you just said was interesting about doing in between the bachelor's degree and master's degree, maybe working in a think tank. What are your thoughts around if people have a certain interest, say, I'm a principal, so education, and what are your thoughts about people going into the field and doing the work and then maybe going into policy?
Yeah, I gave a terrible answer because I only know my narrow life. And my narrow life is one in which I was like, I went straight, from undergraduate to a particular institution. You should go out and try on the career. So if what you're interested in is education, and you think you're interested in things like pedagogy, getting in the schools is exactly the right thing. If what you're interested in is education policy, there is certainly an argument you should see some schools, but there's also an argument you should figure out what the education policy debate looks like. So I think that's a much harder question, whether you're better off spending 2 years as a principal or spending 2 years as part of the education, as part of some education policy think tank or something like that. I don't have a strong view.
I wanted to add was my oldest daughter graduated from college last year and then immediately went to work for City Year in New York, which is part of AmeriCorps, and then she's going to go on and get her master's degree. And she pretty much did exactly, I think, what you said. She said she wasn't quite sure what she wanted to do. But she is interested in public policy, and she felt as though that was the best thing for her to do because she actually eventually wants to start her own foundation, work with underprivileged children. And so by working with City Year with underprivileged children in the school system, so she's following the path that you're talking about, but she's also not sure if she wants to go ahead and pursue a PhD, but she thought, and I have a question for her, she was thinking about, she was told that if she goes for a master's degree, she probably will not get any type of funding. However, if she enrolled in a PhD program, she would get funding, but then she was also told she can get the master's, and if she decides not to continue with the PhD, she could stop at the master and go back to the PhD at any time. Is that true?
There's a lot of things in that question. And congratulations, your daughter seems to be doing great.
I have another one here.
Well, you should be very proud. I hope I get to ask those questions on behalf of my kids one day. The thing I'd suggest, this is really hard advice to hear, and no one believes me on this. Don't think about how much money the education costs. It sounds like your daughters are on a trajectory where they'll figure out how to pay back those student loans, and it's not going to bankrupt them. And so then the right question is the master's the right thing to do, or is a doctoral degree the right thing to do? That's a question for your daughter, not for me. And it depends on what she wants to do and where she's going. Let me tell you, the other reason I urge people strongly not to think about the sticker price of education, I know it costs like a ton of money, and these tuition checks look terrible, but they're actually not even the real cost. The real cost is I spent 4 years out of the workforce. I could have been earning $60,000 a year for those 4 years. No one ever sent me a bill for that, but I was already spending $250,000 before I even started. So the tuition bills were small relative to that. And so, forget tuition, you'll work it out. The question is it worth the investment? And it depends on where she's going. Did that evade your question enough?
Yeah, it did.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So, I'm a senior in high school, and I'm very passionate about ending poverty in the world. So, going into college, what is the best field of study I should go into with wanting to end poverty?
Poverty? Great question. So this comes back to what I think before. You want to know something deeply. And I think that comes from the chief disciplines that engage with that issue. They're economics, sociology. Sociologists would like to think they do more of it. Economists are typically tend to be more involved with public policy. There's greater demand for economists from policymakers. There are, of course, you could get engaged directly in the law defending the rights of the poor. You know, there's tremendous housing issues. There are all sorts of issues dealing with governments and the like, and so you could be a lawyer directly working at that interface. Or, of course, if what you wanted to do was try and figure out more about the political institutions, one could talk about political science. But I think for what you're thinking about, sociology and economics would be a great couple of courses to try on as a freshman. And if you may well find in both of those departments there are actually specific courses about the economics or sociology of poverty. And then you think about all the issues around poverty, gender and race, right? And there are going to be, I'm not saying go off and do a bunch of gender and race studies, I'm saying within economics and sociology within the disciplines, there are often courses directly on those issues as well. And they allow you to really dig deeply and understand these issues, I think, understand what we think we know on those issues quite deeply. Yeah.
Hi there, I'm Angelina Bachelor. I was just wondering, throughout your education career, did you ever study abroad or travel abroad? And if so, how did that shape your career path, or did it shape your career path?
I finished my undergraduate degree, worked at the Reserve Bank of Australia, and then they sent me to the US to do my graduate work. And I thought I was going to go back, and so did they, because that's why they were paying for it. And that never happened. I came over here and I fell in love, and depending on the story you tell, the romantic version is I fell in love with my partner. The other romantic version is I fell in love with the public policy debate over here. One of the great things about the United States, and this is uniquely true, is our debate is one the whole world is watching. And so even if you are a poverty scholar, a scholar of American poverty, people in Australia back home are reading about what the Americans understand about poverty. And so this actually means that all of your careers are potentially turbocharged in a way that those of us from smaller countries are not, which is whatever impact you have has a huge demonstration impact around the world. Yeah.
So this is an incredibly specific question.
Okay.
In regards to the master's degree, I am a current freshman at George Washington University.
Yep.
But I'm a rising junior. So I'm right at the point where I have to decide if I'm going to roll into a 5-year master's program, which would be more like a 4-year master's program. But there's a lot of different perspectives on this. I've had people tell me that going to the same graduate school as undergrad would look good, and I've also had people tell me, well, if you can find a way to save money, then do it. And then there's also, well, you're better off entering the workforce before you go to get your master's degree. So I was wondering if you had an opinion, because you seem like someone knows who to talk about.
No, no one ever said that. You know, economics gives me a very simple way of thinking about the world, costs and benefits. It sounds like one of the benefit is that you can get through this master's degree a year quicker than you otherwise would, is that right? That's a pretty big benefit. Sounds like one of the costs is you'd still be doing it at the same school, you're an undergraduate. This is an enormous opportunity to go off and, you know, become more well-rounded, to visit other cities, to interact with students you never would have otherwise interacted with, to interact with faculty you wouldn't have otherwise. So there are costs, there are benefits. I'm going to leave it to you to figure out which one's bigger than which.
So you spoke about the degree of specificity that you take on when you're studying for your PhD. Now that you've completed it and you're in the workforce, would you say as an economist you get to have a diversity in the topics you're looking at, or are you still kind of stuck to whatever you got your PhD in? Or does that become applicable to other?
This is a great question. So Stella's question, I think, gets at to exactly why I think it's worth going deep. The US and the public policy debate here is one that really rewards expertise. And so I became really good at one tiny little narrow thing. Turns out, one of the things I got my doctoral dissertation on is for understanding marriage and divorce, okay? I haven't even talked about that today, have I? So one of the things is that sort of was my entry ticket to polite society. And then once I was there, I'm allowed to sort of sit back and look, Sandra's let me come and talk to you guys about future careers, and I've only ever had one. I mean, you sort of get this license to write about all sorts of things. You can think of it as sort of like, you know, the thing you go deepest on is sort of how you show your muscles, how, you know, what you got, what you bring to the table. Well, once you've shown your muscles, then people are going to let you lift just about anything. And so that's the returns to really understanding something. Really understanding something earns you the ticket to the table, but it's going to earn you the ticket to a whole lot of other tables as well. Yeah.
I think this question might also apply to other people in the room, but I wanted to know about sort of the opportunities and challenges in sort of balancing the sort of different options that you talked about in public policy, whether you know, if you decide to go in government and you also want to be involved in media or activism, how are you able to sort of navigate your career early on? Maybe for those of us that are uncertain, like which path might come next, and also like how we can sort of balance the different options of public policy that we can pursue.
Yeah. So the biggest career mistake I ever made, I was finishing high school and I talked to my biological father and I was like, you know, what should I do? And he said, keep your options open. So I took a little bit of economics and a little bit of law and a little bit of computer science, and at the end of that, I was a bad economist, a bad computer scientist, and a bad lawyer. And it was the worst advice I've ever gotten. Get good at something, figure out what your passions are, follow them, I think, wholeheartedly. Be tenacious about pursuing opportunities, but then realize that stuff is going to close off. It's just the nature of the beast. So if you're working within the government, you can't have a New York Times column. The New York Times will never employ you, and the government will fire you. If you're working for a political party, you can't also be an activist, because you might have to protest your party. These are often mutually exclusive. Your roles often can't mix and match. Pursue opportunities like hell. Hope that you're in the situation where you have two brilliant roads and one of them's going to close the other off, but that's going to happen. That was true for the first 20 years of my career. That, you know, when I went to the Reserve Bank of Australia, I couldn't write for a local newspaper. Again, this is this thing. You become deeply expert at something, and then the opportunities open back up again. One of the things I could have done, I could have gone to journalism school and pursued journalism as my sole passion. I would have known no economics as a result. So I would have been just like every other journalist, writing a bunch of stuff that I know nothing about and adding very little insight. Instead, I went and became an economist, and then the Times thought, we can sort of teach this guy how to write. And so there was more opportunities. And the reason there was more opportunities is I'm a pretty good economist. You know, you've got to become a pretty good something. And then other people start to add opportunities back on your plate. Let me take one more question.
My name is Shaki. I work at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And so you brought up a very good point earlier in your presentation that I kind of wanted you to further elaborate on. You said that most of the young people in this room have probably spent the third of their lives, you know, living in an economy that has not been, you know, operating efficiently due to an economic policy mistake. And so particularly I'm focusing in on communities of color and young people in this room and potential career opportunities of the future that involve STEM. And so as an economist, you probably are the most well-versed on what that looks like as far as, I guess, economic earning opportunities for, you know, young people who may be of color. And so I just kind of wanted you to speak to that.
It was a broad question. I'm not sure I understood it. So is the question, what are the leading career opportunities for?
Yes.
Okay, so let me half punt on the question and half answer it. So I want to half punt on the question, which is, I believe I'm talking to a room full of people who are interested in the future in public policy. So I want to talk to them about public policy, not about going to become scientists and technologists and engineers and all the other things. That's the sense. But you know, it's absolutely the case. So that you know, the STEM fields are deeply important to our future. It's also the case, even more generally, that the US economy is and will only become more reliant on highly qualified people. So there's some part of me that's like, you know, once we're having the conversation about what major, we've already had the most important conversation, which is what degree. Now, you know, again, my liberal arts friends yell at me when I say, you know, I don't say go and study poetry. It turns out there's like not many poets in America, not many jobs in poetry. So I think, you know, studying something useful. The STEM fields do that, economics does that, political science does that, and for some people, law does that. I want to come back to the question that I punted on earlier, which was the one I was asked, which was, you know, when do you see or feel that what you're doing matters? And I want to tell one story that gives an example of when that's happened, and then one that gives you a sense of the real dangers and how difficult public policy jobs can be. So an example, I'm not sure if any of you read this, there was a front page article on the New York Times maybe 2 weeks ago, which was about 1.5 missing black men. And so what this article documented was across the United States as a whole, there are 1.5 million more prime-age African-American women than there are prime-age African-American men. That's a ratio of 83 men for every 100 women. In the white community, it's 99 out to 100 instead, okay? And where are all these missing men? A large number are in jail, a large number died young, and some are frankly missing. So I wrote that article. And so that's an example where I sat down at a spreadsheet and I'm like, there's something funny going on. And actually where I started on this is I looked up the demographics of Ferguson. Ferguson's extraordinary. In Ferguson, among prime-age African Americans, for every 100 women, there are only 60 men. 60. So the other 40 are in jail, they've died, or they've found Ferguson so inhospitable they've left. So that was a number in a spreadsheet, though. I want to, it's a number that's striking when you talk about it now, but I'm looking through spreadsheets. I'm like, 60? That's kind of messed up. I'm like, well, someone should know about this. And then I started putting together some more numbers, and then my friends and I, we wrote this piece for the Times, and the Times put it on the front page. Last week, Hillary Clinton gave her first major policy speech of the 2016 campaign, in which she actually used our numbers. And she used that as the basis for arguing that one of her priorities will be trying to take on and reverse the incarceration boom. So that was a case. The whole thing was thrilling. It was less than 3 weeks from discovering a number in a spreadsheet to writing a piece on the front page of the Times to Hillary Clinton bringing it out as part of her campaign platform. That doesn't happen very often. So I tell the story because it's powerful, because it's exciting, and it's because things like that wake me up every day. The truth is, we're often one of several people working on an issue. There's already an existing debate, and we're moving it forward slowly. And the truth is, real research doesn't happen from one number in one spreadsheet when you're looking up Ferguson data. It comes from crunching huge amounts of data in projects that take years and often involve many co-workers. And so at the end of the day, when I wrote that Times article, I walked home at the end and I'm like, wow, I really did something today. Most days, I walk home and I'm like, wow, cells C13 through to D92 on that spreadsheet are still confusing me. I hope I'll figure it out this month. And there's no one sort of saying attaboy, and there's no material sense in which I feel like I've made the world a better place, and I just sort of have to hope that I believe in the long game. And it may even be it takes me 2 years to turn this into a 30-page research paper, and that research paper gets published in a journal with a total readership of 8,000 people. But then you also look at and so then, that can be really depressing. You got to be comfortable with not having this rapid feedback. And, social media sort of programs us the other way, right? Like, if we're all living our lives waiting for likes, you don't get many likes in the policy debate. And so, you got to be willing to take the long view. And there's not the instant gratification. It can be difficult. So you've got to believe in what you're doing. And I think that is actually the biggest challenge in a career. And you also got to realize in most issues, there's well-defined sides already, and all you're doing is slightly moving the debate. And that can feel like nothing. But then you realize, think about what's going on with the whole policy debate as a whole. There's all these old white men in Congress who yell at each other, right? There's this wonderful Keynes quote, and I'm going to get it wrong, but he sort of says that to a degree these guys don't realize they're actually enthralled to defunct economists, which is they're still all thinking through particular mental frameworks that they've gotten, that they probably picked up in college. And you get to help shape those frameworks. So maybe what you're doing is bringing just a little bit more sunshine, maybe a little bit more light, trying to help people understand things like the incarceration boom. But that may actually turn out to have really big impacts. You just don't often see them too directly. Let me just say 2 minutes quickly on the other thing I wanted to talk about, which was the third question, which is what is life at a think tank like? So I'm going to bring it back to think tank life now. So the first thing to understand, and I hope this has been clear by now, a think tank is not a debate club. Okay, we all know how to be 18 years old and just crap on with our friends. And we even know how to do that eloquently, and you may well be more eloquent than your friends, and you may be drawn to that, but it's not a debate club. Think tanks are about bringing deep expertise to critical problems. And what you need to bring is not eloquence, but deep expertise and deep study. The other thing, it's fundamentally about research. It's about grappling with the big problems of our day, understanding them in a way that has never been understood before, and then being able to highlight them in a way that other people are going to find them understandable. And that's the big difference between think tanks and academia. Because in a think tank, you're trying to shape the world. You're trying to shape the debate. So there's no point writing a 30-page treatise with complicated algebra because no one on the Hill's ever going to read it. What you need to be able to do is work your way through all that stuff to real insight, and then be able to figure out what the 800 words is that you might be able to get the senator to read, and then he or she will turn it into a 2-sentence soundbite. But hopefully it's a 2-sentence soundbite that helps move the world a little bit. The other most important thing about life at a think tank you've already experienced this morning, there's a tremendous amount of free food at a think tank. There's breakfast, there's lunch, and you can go to all the other think tanks. And some, if the right-wing think tanks, they have like shrimp and oysters. It's it's amazing. You actually have a lot of but fundamentally it's about a life of the mind and a life of deep engagement. You have many opportunities to travel, and what are the sorts of things we do in our day? I will, you might meet with congressional staff. You might take background calls from journalists. You will be doing your own research, so you'll be crunching some numbers and working with your research assistants on that. We have internal seminars where we'll critique each other's work, and your very best friend is the guy who you're most likely to say, his idea is terrible. Yell at each other for a little while and figure out exactly which of you is right. The rewards, I think, are that you get to shape the debate, and the most important think tank thinkers have actually had large effects on US policy, but it's also really easy to be ineffective at it. And there are people who spin their wheels and aren't doing a great job. It's like any other career. I want to conclude on this in terms of, I think the two most important factors for thinking about think tank life are, I'm an economist, so the two most important factors for anything are always supply and demand. So let me tell you about supply. And this is true not just of think tank life, but throughout public policy. I think it's great that you're here. I think that it's great that you're engaged with public policy. I applaud and am buoyed by your commitment to changing the world. The thing you need to realize, though, is the room of people of your generation who want to change the world is much, much bigger than this one. It's enormous. Because the stakes are so high, there are literally thousands of truly brilliant people trying to be engaged in a business that you're engaged in. So you have to work hard to be remotely successful at this. And the people who you have to be better than are really, really freaking brilliant. The second thing, though, is there's supply. There's a ton of supply. A lot of people who want to shape the debate. There's demand. There is tremendous demand and hunger for the insights of underrepresented groups. So, there's a mild irony that I'm here as an old white guy talking to you because, it's not like there's a shortage of old white guys in Washington. But economics does not have enough women involved. Economics does not have enough people of color involved. It does not have enough people of different families and sexualities involved. And we are deeply hungry for and need your insights. Think about the stuff that Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote after Baltimore. He was able to give real insight into what a life of violence meant because he'd experienced it in a way that old white upper middle class guys hadn't. And there's tremendous hunger for that. My friend Roland Fryer just won the Clark Medal for economics, the best economist under 40. And he was able in his work on race and on education to bring a set of perspectives that have been totally absent from the debate because of the demographic imbalance among those in the debate. And so there will be challenges for sure. I was at a mentoring breakfast a couple of weeks ago. There was mentoring for female, actually a few months ago, for female economists, and they walked into a room. It was all women. And I felt totally freaking self-conscious. I'm like, do I really belong here? And it was the first time they'd ever invited men to come and mentor. And I felt, I'm like, I don't look like everyone here. This is weird. And I turned around at one of my friends and said, and I explained this to her. She's like, welcome to my career. And it was her reality, and it's a really important reality. And I'm not going to suggest that those challenges don't exist. They absolutely exist. But by the same token, your voices are important. And we on the hiring side, I think, are committed to bringing them in. And so if you can be that brilliant person, if you can add this, bring the supply, there will be the demand. So let me stop there. I thought Lynn was next, or because I can take more questions until Lynn comes back. I'm happy to take questions all day. Yeah.
You probably work all the time, so I'm gonna ask you a question on a humanity level.
Yeah.
If you had any superpower, what would it be?
It would be 48 hours in a day. You know, so I want to start with your question, which is you work every day. One part of me does, and another part of me never works, because what I do is what I love. And I'm thinking about economics, but I'm thinking about economics because I want to think about economics. That means there's never a moment I'm doing something because I don't want to be doing it. I'm always thinking about the thing I'm most passionate about. Yeah.
I was wondering, so if you had to run on an internship with the Peace Corps or the State Department, that's still like educating yourself, because like you're not having a big degree, but you still have that experience in the field. Absolutely.
We got to find ways to wedge your foot in the door of the public policy debate. And those sorts of internships, I think, are going to show you what those jobs look like. So for you, they learn. Remember, I said careers are like clothes. You've got to try them on. You could go to the State Department and realize you don't like them. They're all jerks. And then you're going to think about a different career. So, you know, there's that sense in which you're going to get a lot from it. But also, man, that sounds like a pretty good resume item. And it shows, the other thing that's important, there's a ton of people who are going to apply for any job. What I want is the people who are deeply committed to changing things. I'm going to ask everyone if they're deeply committed. They're all going to lie to me and say yes. So what I need is some evidence that they've done something that only someone who is deeply committed would do, which is things like internships, things like being involved in activist organizations and the like. You're signaling to me that you're committed to a career in public policy, and I'm going to listen.